The All India Village Industries, in its great work of reconstruction, is endeavoring to inculcate this ideal of Swadeshi in the masses. Thus, duty is seen to begin in the sphere of the family and of the village, then slowly widening out to include the motherland and the rest of humanity. By degrees, the villages will become once more the real centers of Indian life, self-sufficing, thanks to the revival of lost or dying industries, the even distribution of production, and profit slowly helping to banish starvation and replacing abject poverty by prosperity. Machines are seen to be useful if used only on a small scale and simply as a help for individual workers. Then only does man cease to be their slave, and the danger of monopoly of production need not be feared. The task is stupendous, and volunteers are needed to become experts in all the various methods pertaining to the material and moral welfare of the villagers. After a period of training, these volunteers are then sent out to change the existing conditions. Sanitation is taught and demonstrated in practical ways. Cleanliness is enforced as regards water supplies, ventilation, and clothing. Food reforms point to the necessity for preserving the vitamins and the using, for instance, of unpolished rice, hand-ground wholemeal, and unrefined sugar. Under the scheme of reviving local industries, the people are not encouraged to compete with machine-made goods, but primarily to satisfy their own needs. 75% of the population being producers of raw material, they are shown the importance of utilizing it directly instead of sending it out to be manufactured, a method entailing both loss of employment and added expense in the purchase of the finished product. Little over a year has elapsed since Gandhi launched this association, and already much work has been accomplished. Wardha is not intended to become a production center, but experiments will be carried out there, information and technical advice being sent to all parts of India, enabling the peasants to improve their ways and means of livelihood. Walking around the compound, we visited a few cottage industries, such as those of paper making and beekeeping, which have just been started for experimental purposes. We were shown a species of dwarf bees of incredible small size, whose honey is highly prized because of its remarkable medicinal properties. The Indian bee seems of a very mild disposition in comparison with its western brother, and rarely stings if treated gently, even though smoke is avoided when opening the hives. It might seem that they also were following the doctrine of ahimsa. Plans were on foot to build a museum of village industries and a training school for social workers. At the time, all efforts were being directed towards the organizing of the Khadi and Village Industries exhibition, where people will have the chance of seeing much that otherwise could only be studied in villages scattered about in remote parts of the country. For the first time during our travels, we got a foretaste of real heat, accompanied by a dry, scorching wind, which filled the air with dense clouds of dust. Our thoughts turned instinctively and longingly to the cool heights of the Himalayas, which would be comparatively close at hand and of easy access when we found ourselves in the north. After Wardha, the monotony of the plain was relieved by a hilly district covered with a dense jungle. The trees were still leafless, but great clusters of orange flowers hung from the gray boughs, putting a vivid note of color into the bleak landscape. During the few hours we were compelled to spend at a junction before catching the next train to Allahabad, we happened to make the acquaintance of a young Indian working on the station, who insisted on taking us back to his home for supper. We were only too glad to get away from the noise and bustle of the waiting room, and moreover welcomed the opportunity of responding to such genuine friendliness and spontaneous hospitality, always so characteristic of the Indian temperament. While our host went off in search of his wife, we awaited their return in their small bungalow. There were only two poorly furnished rooms, but they were neatly kept and clean. On the walls were hung a few Indian pictures of a religious nature, as well as a number of Sanskrit and Persian verses pertaining to the spiritual life. Here we saw once more the expression of a natural culture and refinement commonly found even amongst the uneducated people. As soon as the young wife returned with her husband, she retired to prepare the meal, and after a while we were invited to go out into their tiny garden, which contained a few trees and shrubs. It was now quite dark, but the stars were shining brightly, and the cool air was wonderfully soothing. We sat down and watched our hostess squatting before a primitive clay stove, deftly mixing and preparing a batter for the chapatis, and frying them over the open fire. She looked a mere girl and appeared very shy. Moreover, she did not understand English. For the present, her whole attention was directed to her duties and waiting on her husband and her husband's guests. She would no doubt have been very surprised to know that we thought her beautiful, unspoilt as she was by modern civilization and the hankering after unnecessary luxuries. By the dim light of a lantern, we partook of an abundant supper. The chapatis were a sort of thick pancake made of flour and water, eaten as bread, and they were in abundant supply, and prepared and offered with love, and therefore worthy to set before a king. Now and then, when so inclined, we exchanged some words with our host with the same freedom as if we had found ourselves in the company of old friends, instead of with strangers under whose roof fate had destined us to spend a few brief moments. When the time came to regain the station, we left thoroughly refreshed and rested. We were sitting in a delightful garden on the outskirts of Allahabad, where kind friends had put us up in one of the school buildings. Thanks to the presence of water, which was here in abundance, flowers grew in profusion, and the whole town looked like a vast garden city, with shady streets and beautiful houses surrounded by green lawns and trees. The holidays had already begun, and no children's voices broke the silence of the afternoon. Moreover, during the midday heat, none ventured forth from the darkened rooms, cooled by electric fans and thick grass door curtains, and frequently watered and giving rise to a pleasant evaporation. As we tried to locate our surroundings, we found that in front of us the garden ended abruptly, and with it all trace of vegetation. We seemed to be on the edge of an immense plain which stretched away under the dazzling sunlight. Winding in and out of this plain, and at no great distance, appeared a narrow line of shimmering blue, and we suddenly realized that we must be looking at the Ganges. Our first impulse was to start immediately to reach the water's edge, but the sun was far too hot, and we had perforce to wait till evening. Night had fallen when we found ourselves standing on one of the bridges peering down into the darkness. The faint sound of water flowing unseen far below revealed the presence of the sacred river. Sacred it is indeed, for as we tried to enter its spirit, we were caught up into a tremendously powerful magnetic current of spiritual influence, which appeared to follow the visible stream. The sensation was quite unexpected and altogether out of proportion to the present insignificant volume of water. But it was so impressive and soul-thrilling that we were loth to depart. Long we leant in silence against the rails of the bridge and communed with the glorious life that flowed so abundantly past us, and we rejoiced at having contacted something of the greatness of this mighty and sacred river, which would be treasured in our hearts amongst the never-to-be-forgotten experiences of India. One morning before sunrise, in the marvelous coolness of the dawn, which perhaps can never be so fully appreciated as in the East, we set out with some young students who were keen to show us one of the characteristic sights of their town, Allahabad, being situated at the junction of the two holy rivers, the Ganges and the Jumna. It is looked upon as an important place of pilgrimage. Millions of spiritually minded people flock here from all parts of the country during the great festivals, but even in ordinary times it is a center of much religious worship. A tonga, or a carriage, took us quickly out of town and deposited us on the banks of the Jumna. The steep path led down to the river, where a number of small boats were awaiting customers. We were soon rowing downstream past the massive walls of the fort to where the blue-green Jumna meets the golden Ganges. The difference of color was very striking indeed, and strange to say, the waters do not mingle at once, but continue for some time to flow separately, keeping their distinctive colorings. The scene was one of extraordinary animation. Hundreds of boats were moored side by side in midstream, and a dense crowd of men, women, and children were bathing in the shallow water, praising the name of the Lord, immersing themselves repeatedly and chanting the sacred hymns and mantrams, while Brahmins waited about selling milk, flowers, sandalwood paste, and holy ashes. The place was charged with the most intense devotion, bringing, as it were, the idea of God down from the sphere of speculation into the everyday lives of the people. We had been remarking how strong was the influence of the place, as it is also in certain other spiritual centers in the country. But it is also true to say that this indefinable spiritual quality is stamped on the whole atmosphere of India and affects consciously or unconsciously all who come under its influence. Our companions, having finished their ablutions and changed into spotless white clothes, we slowly regained the shore. Other boats were also returning before the heat got unpleasant, and as the worshippers wound their way round across the calm water, their songs to Rama and Krishna still filled the air with the magic of their rhythm and melody. It is generally a source of surprise to Europeans that Indians are able to drink the water of the Ganges and Jumna without immediately falling prey to cholera or dysentery, for they do not wash, clean their clothes, bathe their cattle, and above all, throw therein the half-consumed corpses of their dead. Behind the ingrained superstition that holy water can never harm, but only wash away sins and renew health, and there must be some truth, or now the whole population would be extinct. At the end of the last century, a scientific examination of the waters of the Jumna and Ganges revealed the presence of an unknown element preventing this terrible germ from propagating and ensuring its ultimate destruction. A series of experiments have proved that the microbe of cholera can neither develop in these rivers nor, when an epidemic breaks out, be carried downstream to other towns. The pilgrims going from place to place alone spread the disease. The wells are found to be the most dangerous sources of infection, whereas the use of river water, owing to its peculiar properties, is strongly recommended, giving thus a scientific basis to the popular belief. The element of uncertainty continued to be conspicuous in our traveling, but experience proved that the best policy was to let our plans be fashioned by events and opportunities. It so happened that we found ourselves unexpectedly in Agra, driving through the quaint, narrow streets of the ancient town to the house of some Indians whose Allahabad relatives had wired our arrival. New friends thus sprang up at every stage of our journey, smoothing out difficulties and rendering those little acts of service which are of such invaluable assistance when the tongue of the country is not understood. The same evening, we were taken out by car to see the main object of our visit, the Taj Mahal. This world-famous tomb, erected by the great Mughal emperor in memory of his beloved wife, stands as one of the most perfect examples of divine beauty mirrored in earthly form. So much has been written on this marvelous place that in order to avoid a possible disappointment, we made a point of trying to forget entirely all that we had ever heard or read about it. Reality is always different from what one imagines or expects, and just as a sensitive plate can only reproduce a clear picture if it has not yet been exposed, so the mind must be rid of all previous impressions and ready-made ideas if the light of intuition is to bring down the direct knowledge of the true and the beautiful. The Taj Mahal is situated some distance from the town on the banks of the Jumna. By the time we reached the spot, the last shades of the sunset had faded from the sky, and one by one the stars began to shine. Above the immaculate dome and the minaret standing out amidst the gathering dusk, the exquisite crescent of the new moon appeared overhead like a silver thread. The gardens were deserted, and perfect silence and a sort of solemn hush brooded over the whole place. No details were visible, and the attention not being taken up by the perception of line and color was free to concentrate on that indefinable yet tangible stillness which gave one the impression of standing on holy ground. Descriptions must inevitably fall short of the reality they endeavor to express, because words can merely hint at the nature of that which the soul has experienced. Yet the listener may seek to penetrate behind the words and so contact for himself, in some measure, the boundless life behind the imperfect and limited form. Early the next morning, we returned to admire the outward aspect of the Taj as it appeared in the brilliant sunshine. The central cupola is reflected in the clear water of a long, narrow tank, bordered on either side by rows of dark cypress trees which form a sharp contrast to the pure white edifice. Even in full daylight, bereft of mystery, the place had kept that magic atmosphere of which had been so conscious the night before. One cannot help feeling that all who come here must be more or less affected by the beauty of the place, whether they realize it consciously or not, and go forth better than they came. The main building, in which the tombs of the Emperor Shah Jahan and his wife are to be seen, is entirely in white marble, excluding any possibility of gloom or depression. The walls are decorated with floral designs in basso levo, or by means of inlaid precious stones, such as lapis lazuli, agate, and cornelian, revealing the marvelous skill of the Mughal artists and their love of nature. Never perhaps have flowers been rendered in the cold, hard medium of stone with such grace and perfection. From the wide marble terrace, we looked down upon the Jumna, flowing lazily at our feet. A thin reef of smoke rose in the still air from a nearby funeral pyre, while large black carrion crows hovered above the burning ground. One is thus ever being confronted by death, and at every step its presence is revealed. Indeed, it becomes such a familiar sight that what at first may strike one as gruesome and terrible is felt to be a part of the great law, and therefore neither to be feared nor looked upon as undesirable. Nowhere can the deathless nature of the spirit be so easily realized as in India, and one is constantly being reminded of that wonderful and well-known passage in the Bhagavad Gita, in which, on the eve of the great battle of Kurukshetra, Sri Krishna thus addresses the mighty warrior Arjuna, downhearted at the impending doom. The wise grieve neither for the living nor for the dead, nor at any time was I not, nor thou, nor these princes of men, nor verily shall we ever cease to be hereafter. As the dweller in the body experienceth in the body childhood, youth, old age, so passeth he on to another body. The steadfast one grieveth not. He is not born, nor does he die, nor having been, ceaseth he any more to be. Unborn, perpetual, eternal and ancient, he is not slain when the body is slaughtered. As a man, casting off worn-out garments, taketh new ones, so the dweller in the body, casting off worn-out bodies, entereth into others that are new. Weapons cleave him not, nor fire burneth him, nor waters wet him, nor wind drieth him away. Uncleavable he, incombustible he, and indeed neither to be wetted nor dried away. Perpetual, all-pervasive, stable, immovable and ancient. Unmanifest, unthinkable, immutable, he is called therefore, and knowing him as such, thou shouldest not grieve. For certain is death for the born, and certain is birth for the dead. Therefore, over the inevitable, thou shouldest not grieve.